If you enjoy uncovering the hidden side of history, the facts that were buried for decades, this video is for you. Here, you can simply let it play while you do something else. I'm going to tell you, based on official reports, declassified documents, and historical investigations, what really happened inside one of the most secret facilities of World War II, a place where doctors became soldiers and science was used as a weapon. Throughout this video, you'll understand why Unit 731 was created, who led it, what experiments were conducted inside it, and why, even after the war, almost no one was punished. Everything you're about to hear comes from verified historical sources, United States Army reports, Soviet archives, and real testimonies from people who lived through what seemed impossible to believe. So relax, adjust the volume, and get ready to learn about one of the most disturbing and well-documented chapters of modern history, the forbidden experiments of Unit 731. Let's begin. Between the late 1930s and the final days of World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army maintained in Manchuria a facility so secret that, for decades, its very existence was officially denied. Located on the outskirts of the city of Harbin, occupied after Japan's invasion of China in 1931, the base was presented to the population as the Institute for Epidemic Prevention and Research. In reality, it was the largest human experimentation center in modern history, a complex known by the code name Unit 731. Under the command of military physician Shiro Ishii, the facility became the heart of a biological warfare program that operated in absolute secrecy, beyond the reach of the press, the Red Cross, and even much of the Japanese government itself. The unit was part of a much broader project of scientific and military expansion by Japan, which saw war not only as territorial conquest, but also as an opportunity for technological advancement. The logic was simple. If the country wanted to dominate Asia, it also needed to dominate the weapons of the future, and for Ishii, those weapons would be viruses, bacteria, and direct experimentation on the human body. In the decades that followed, the existence of Unit 731 would become one of the darkest and most denied chapters of the 20th century. The few who survived what happened within its walls never forgot what they saw, and many who worked there took their secrets to the grave. What began as a medical center would be transformed into a true laboratory of death, a place where science and cruelty became indistinguishable in the name of empire. This is the story of how a group of scientists, soldiers, and physicians of Imperial Japan crossed every ethical boundary known, and how the world took more than 50 years to uncover what really happened behind the gates of Unit 731. Chapter 1. Historical Context and the Origins of Unit 731. In the early 1930s, Japan was undergoing a period of intense transformation. The country, which had rapidly modernized over the previous decades, was beginning to view science and industry as the pillars of military power. Imperialist ambition was growing, and with it, the desire to dominate the Asian continent. In 1931, the Imperial Japanese Army invaded the region of Manchuria in northeastern China under the pretext of ensuring stability after an alleged Chinese attack on a Japanese railway, an attack Japan itself had staged. The occupation gave rise to the puppet state of Manchukuo, controlled by Tokyo, which became an ideal testing ground for the empire's military experiments. Within this context of expansion and nationalism emerged a name that would become central to this story: Shiro Ishii. Trained in medicine, Ishii stood out for his charisma and his ability to persuade high-ranking officers. He believed that the future of warfare would not lie only in tanks and planes, but in invisible, inexpensive, and devastating biological weapons. Between 1932 and 1936, Ishii began presenting his plans directly to the top commanders of the Japanese army. He argued that the country needed a secret research program to develop bacteriological weapons, and that, to achieve this, it was essential to conduct direct experiments on humans. With the support of influential generals, he received unlimited funding and complete autonomy. The first experimental base was established in the city of Beijing, also in Manchuria. There, Ishii began the first tests of infection and observation of disease in Chinese and Soviet prisoners. But the site was far too small for his ambitions, and in 1936, the project was transferred to a new facility on the outskirts of Harbin, receiving the official name, Unit 731. Officially, its full name was Kwantung Army Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Unit. But within the military, everyone knew what it really meant. It was a facade for the largest biological warfare program conceived in the 20th century. Ishii had a clear objective: to transform medical science into a controlled weapon of destruction. For him, diseases such as bubonic plague, cholera, and anthrax could be more efficient than any bomb. While Western laboratories were seeking vaccines, Ishii and his subordinates were searching for ways to deliberately spread infections, measure human suffering, and understand in detail how a body dies. Between 1937 and 1939, with the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War, Unit 731 expanded rapidly. Thousands of prisoners of war and Chinese civilians were taken to the base. There, they became known as marutas, a word meaning logs of wood, a way to completely dehumanize the victims and conceal what took place. Behind the walls of the facility, a scientific and military structure of unprecedented scale began to operate. It was the beginning of an operation that combined absolute secrecy, unlimited resources, and a total absence of ethics. Japan did not merely accept Ishii's methods, it funded them, supervised them, and saw in them a potential advantage to win the war that lay ahead. Chapter 2. Structure and Operation of Unit 731. When the new Unit 731 facility was completed on the outskirts of Harbin, it became a small military city isolated from the outside world. With more than 150 buildings, tall walls, and gates guarded day and night, the complex operated as a mixture of laboratory, prison, and extermination camp. No civilian was allowed to enter, no prisoner ever left. The base was built with the goal of being self-sufficient. It had dormitories, mess halls, its own railway lines, supply storage areas, and even an industrial crematorium. Army personnel lived in comfortable houses near the facility, with exclusive schools and markets, completely separated from the rest of the local population. To the workers, the place was presented as a patriotic scientific mission. The internal structure was divided into highly compartmentalized sectors, each with a specific function. Section 1, Administration and overall control of the unit. Section 2, Development of biological weapons and pathogen cultivation. Section 3, Human experimentation, conducted by doctors and surgeons. Section 4, Field testing, where weapons and agents were used on prisoners and animals. Section 5, Technical support and destruction of evidence. Each wing contained laboratories equipped with the most modern medical instruments of the time: microscopes, incubators, pressure chambers, and surgical tools imported from Germany. But beneath the appearance of a scientific center, what truly took place there was the study of death in all its possible forms. The prisoners, called marutas, were brought from various regions under Japanese occupation in China. Some were prisoners of war, others civilians accused of espionage, resistance, or simply captured during military operations. Men, women, and even children were taken into the complex under strict secrecy. No official records with real names were kept, only identification numbers. The daily routine inside the base was organized like a military institution. Scientists wore uniforms, attended daily formations, and received direct orders from the Kwantung Army Command. To them, research was a patriotic duty, and the victims were considered nothing more than experimental material. Reports produced within Unit 731 were written in cold, technical language. Phrases such as "the subject expired," "satisfactory result," or "observation completed" replaced any reference to human suffering. This emotional distancing was part of their training. Doctors were instructed to eliminate any trace of empathy. Security at the site was extreme. Armed guards patrolled constantly, and any attempt to escape resulted in immediate execution. To maintain secrecy, even the workers themselves were forbidden from discussing their tasks outside the facility. Correspondence was censored, and contact with family members was strictly controlled. It is estimated that at the peak of its activities, more than 3,000 people worked at Unit 731, including doctors, technicians, nurses, and soldiers. As for the victims, the number of prisoners used in experiments is estimated at more than 10,000 over the course of 9 years of operation. From the outside, the base looked like just another medical facility. On the inside, it was the central laboratory of Japan's biological warfare program. There, science was not used to heal. It was used to discover the most efficient way to destroy a human being without firing a single shot. Chapter 3. The Experiments of Unit 731. Inside Unit 731, scientific research became a catalog of atrocities. What was called experimental science, there was, in practice, the systematic study of pain and death. Everything was meticulously documented. Every reaction, every scream, every number recorded in the cold and objective reports later presented to the Japanese Army's high command. The main focus was biological agents. Japan wanted to develop invisible weapons capable of destroying entire cities without firing a single shot. To achieve this, thousands of Chinese, Korean, Soviet, and even some Western prisoners were deliberately infected with bubonic plague, cholera, typhus, syphilis, and anthrax. Some were injected with bacteria, others had their skin cut open so the pathogens could be applied directly to the wounds. Symptoms were observed daily, and the results recorded in detail. When the body began to fail, researchers opened the prisoner's chest while still alive to observe the progression of infections in real time. These procedures, known as vivisections, became a common practice within the unit. Surgeries were performed without anesthesia, as the goal was to preserve the body's natural reactions. In some cases, doctors removed entire sections of organs to track how long the body could resist. The experiments ranged from repeated amputations to forced transplants between prisoners. None of this was considered torture. It was treated as research. Other areas of the unit were dedicated to studying the limits of human endurance. Men were exposed to sub-zero temperatures until their arms and legs froze completely. Scientists then struck the limbs with wooden sticks to identify the exact moment when the sound stopped being hollow, the sign that the tissue had turned into solid ice. After that, the frozen areas were slowly warmed, with researchers measuring how long the body took to respond and recording the pain as clinical data. In the pressure and altitude laboratories, prisoners were placed inside sealed chambers to simulate the conditions faced by pilots at high altitudes. As the pressure dropped, eyes bled, eardrums ruptured, and lungs collapsed. Everything was carefully measured in seconds and millimeters of mercury. The goal was to calculate how far a human body could endure information considered essential for the development of Japanese military aviation. There were also deprivation experiments. Prisoners were left for days without water, food, or sleep, or exposed to the sun for hours. The purpose was to understand how long a person could survive in extreme conditions. These data were used to train soldiers to withstand hunger or exhaustion during military campaigns. But perhaps the most ambitious experiments were the field tests. After developing biological weapons inside the base, Ishii and his subordinates began testing them on entire populations. Ceramic bombs filled with plague-infected fleas were dropped over Chinese villages. Wells and rivers were contaminated with cholera and typhus. The affected towns were observed from a distance, and the outbreaks that followed were described as satisfactory results. Internal reports indicate that hundreds of thousands of civilians died in these biological dispersal tests. Among the prisoners, there were also pregnant women. They were deliberately infected to observe the transmission of diseases to the fetus. Researchers documented how the infections progressed inside the womb and, after birth, conducted autopsies on both mother and child. Everything was done in silence, under the justification that science needed data. Information was collected with the same rigor a conventional laboratory would use for experiments on animals. Each victim received a number, and all parameters were recorded: age, weight, body temperature, time until each organ failed. Reports were written in technical language, using clinical terms to describe what was, in reality, murder. Words like positive result, test completed, and response observed replaced any mention of the life fading on the table. These records were found years later by the Soviets and later analyzed by the United States. They revealed that nothing was improvised. There were standardized protocols, schedules, and even periodic reviews of efficiency. Unit 731 operated as a true scientific institution, except its specialty was destruction. At the end of each testing cycle, the bodies were incinerated in the complex's furnaces. The ashes were mixed with industrial waste and dumped into a nearby river to erase any trace. But the traces were not erased. The notes, the memories of survivors, and testimonies from some former members eventually became definitive proof that science, when stripped of morality, can become the most effective instrument of human cruelty. Chapter 4. The Scientific and Military Purpose of Unit 731. What happened inside Unit 731 was not merely gratuitous cruelty. Each experiment, no matter how brutal it seemed, was part of a meticulously planned military project. Japan viewed science as a pillar of modern warfare and believed that mastering biology meant mastering life and death themselves. For Shiro Ishii, biological warfare was the next step in military evolution. He often said, "Chemical weapons are the past. Biological weapons are the future." His goal was to transform diseases into tools of attack, an invisible, inexpensive, self-sustaining type of weapon capable of causing the same devastation as a bomb, but without destroying infrastructure. All it took was contaminating a water supply, releasing a few infected fleas, or letting the wind do the rest. Ishii's vision was pragmatic. While the West spent fortunes developing tanks and aircraft, he believed that a handful of pathogens could defeat entire armies. And most importantly, no one would have to take responsibility. An epidemic could be disguised as a natural outbreak, and no nation could be directly blamed. The data collected inside Unit 731 were turned into technical reports, and sent to the high command of the Kwantung Army. These reports included graphs, contamination timelines, mortality curves, and notes on dispersion efficiency. The tone resembled that of a modern scientific project, precise, organized, and emotionless. But the content revealed a purely military purpose. The unit developed ceramic bombs designed to carry plague-infected fleas. These bombs were tested on a large scale in Chinese villages. The infected prisoners inside the base were only the initial phase. The real testing ground was the outside world. Between 1940 and 1942, Japanese aircraft dropped these devices over entire cities. Days later, local hospitals recorded sudden outbreaks of deadly diseases. Thousands died, and each death was, for Ishii, a successful field result. The experiments also aimed to understand how to make Japanese soldiers immune to those same diseases. While prisoners were being infected, researchers tested experimental vaccines on volunteer troops. The intention was to create biologically resistant soldiers, a group of warriors who could survive where their enemies would collapse. Internally, Unit 731 produced antidotes, antibiotics, and decontamination protocols. It was all part of a calculated balance. The same science that created the plagues also produced the cures, but only for those on the right side. Researchers knew exactly how long a human body could withstand each infection, how long it took for death to occur, and the most effective ways to spread a disease without losing efficiency. This combination of medicine and militarism transformed Ishii's laboratory into a true biological warfare industry. Japan saw the project as a strategic advantage for future campaigns. Later reports showed that there were plans to launch biological attacks against the United States and the Soviet Union if the war dragged on. The targets included the American West Coast and areas near Vladivostok in Siberia. These operations were prepared, but never executed due to the abrupt end of the war in 1945. The legacy of Unit 731, therefore, is not only one of horror, it is also one of military planning and scientific calculation. Shiro Ishii and his team believed they were shaping the future of warfare, creating weapons that did not explode but multiplied, weapons that did not need to be carried because they could reproduce inside every human body. They did not work out of sadism, they worked out of conviction. They sincerely believed they were serving their homeland. And perhaps that is the most disturbing part of this entire history. Evil was not seen as evil. It was seen as science, as progress, as patriotism. Chapter 5. The Collapse of Unit 731 and the Destruction of Evidence. In 1945, the war was already lost for Japan. American bombs were falling on Tokyo, and Imperial troops were retreating on every front. As the empire crumbled, Shiro Ishii knew that the secret of Unit 731 was at risk. The Red Army was advancing rapidly through Manchuria, and Harbin, the heart of the project, would be one of the first targets. It was at that moment that Ishii made a decision that would seal the fate of everything he had built. He ordered the total elimination of all evidence. Every document, piece of equipment, record, and body had to disappear before the Soviets arrived. Base officers received direct orders: burn the files, destroy the laboratories, eliminate the prisoners. The operation began in July 1945 and lasted several weeks. Japanese workers were instructed to blow up the buildings with grenades and pour acid over the corpses. The prisoners who were still alive were executed one by one, and their bodies cremated in the unit's own furnaces. The personnel involved in the executions were promised silence and, in some cases, new identities. Those who refused to participate were killed along with the prisoners. No witnesses were to remain. Ishii also ordered all scientists and technicians to flee to Japan before the Soviets arrived. They were to disguise themselves as civilians, blend into the population, and deny any involvement with the project. The destruction was so thorough that when Soviet troops reached Harbin, they found only smoldering ruins and traces of interrupted experiments. The reports, samples, and identities of those involved had vanished. Even so, the Soviets managed to collect fragments of evidence. Medical equipment, remnants of vials, skeletons, and pieces of documents were found beneath the rubble. These fragments would later be used in the Khabarovsk trial in 1949, when several scientists captured in Manchuria confessed details about the program. But most of those responsible were never judged. While the Soviets attempted to reconstruct the puzzle, Ishii and his team were already back in Japan, under the protection of the Japanese government itself. Officially, Unit 731 had never existed. No public record mentioned it, and for decades the topic remained a national taboo. For the Japanese army, silence was a matter of honor. For the scientists, it was a matter of survival. And for the United States, which would soon occupy Japan, That silence would become a valuable bargaining chip, an opportunity they would soon use to their advantage. Chapter 6. The Secret Agreement with the United States. After Japan's surrender in August 1945, the world began to learn the scale of the atrocities committed by the Imperial Army. The Nuremberg trials revealed the horrors of Nazism in Europe, and many believed the same would happen in Asia. But while the Germans were judged and condemned, the crimes of Unit 731 remained in the shadows. And this was no accident. When American forces occupied Japan, intelligence officers began investigating the Army's secret facilities. Among them, the first rumors emerged about the mysterious Biological Research Center in Manchuria. Soviet reports had already described the ruins found in Harbin, mentioning signs of human experimentation. But instead of joining the Soviet investigation, the United States chose a different path, to negotiate directly with those responsible. The justification was simple. The data collected by Unit 731 were unique. No other country had obtained such detailed records about the behavior of lethal diseases in living human bodies. For the American military, this was not merely evidence of crime, it was scientifically valuable information, especially in a world that only months later would enter the Cold War. In 1947, a U.S. Army team began secret meetings with former members of Unit 731. The objective was to obtain all original reports, charts, and experimental results in exchange for complete immunity. The Japanese scientists handed over entire boxes of documents describing infections, dispersal methods, and detailed physiological analyses. Many of these reports contained precise numbers, incubation periods, mortality rates, the resistance of each bacterium, and even instructions for manufacturing ceramic bombs. In return, General Douglas MacArthur, who headed the occupation of Japan, ordered that the names of those involved be kept confidential. None of them would be brought to trial. In official reports, the case was classified as closed for reasons of national security. The United States argued that exposing the crimes would weaken the new alliance with Japan and could benefit the Soviet Union, which had already obtained part of the information in Khabarovsk. Thus, Shiro Ishii, the man who led the experiments, was never arrested. He lived comfortably in Tokyo until his death in 1959, never answering for anything. Other members of the team were appointed to important positions in Japanese universities, hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies. Some even collaborated with American medical programs during the Korean War, using the knowledge acquired in Harbin. Declassified documents decades later revealed that the U.S. Army used Unit 731's data in its own biological research programs, conducted in secret bases such as Fort Detrick in Maryland. The justification was always the same. The results had already been obtained, and ignoring them would be scientifically irresponsible. The result of this decision was the complete erasure of Japanese responsibility. While Nazi crimes became a symbol of science without ethics, the crimes of Unit 731 were quietly absorbed into a new geopolitical context. The knowledge obtained at the cost of thousands of lives became a strategic asset, and the scientists who should have been in a courtroom ended up being treated as valuable collaborators. The episode is one of the clearest examples of how, in the post-war era, historical truth was shaped by the interests of the Cold War. The United States gained access to exclusive information on biological weapons. Japan preserved its reputation, and the victims, the thousands of men, women, and children used as test subjects, were forgotten, without justice, without recognition, and without names. Chapter 7. Post-War Revelations and Legacy. For nearly 4 decades after the end of World War II, the name Unit 731 simply vanished from public records. The Japanese government denied its existence, newspapers avoided the subject, and universities preferred to ignore the past. The scientists who had worked at the base went on to have successful careers. Some became professors at respected institutions. Others led medical research or took positions in pharmaceutical companies. The silence was so deep that, for the average citizen, Unit 731 was nothing more than a rumor, a wartime legend with no concrete proof. This silence began to crumble slowly in the 1980s. Some former members of the unit, now elderly, started to speak publicly. The first to break the pact of secrecy was Yoshio Shinozuka, who had served as a teenage medical assistant. In a 1995 interview, he admitted to taking part in vivisections on live prisoners and said he carried guilt until the end of his life. Others, like Ken Yuasa, also confessed to conducting experiments on Chinese civilians and described the environment of blind obedience that dominated the base. At the same time, journalists and historians began searching for documentary evidence. In Soviet archives, reports from the 1949 Khabarovsk trial resurfaced, detailing confessions from captured Japanese doctors. In American archives, declassified documents confirmed that Unit 731's reports had indeed been obtained and analyzed after the war. Cross-referencing these sources began to assemble the puzzle Japan had tried to hide for so long. In 2002, after decades of international pressure, the Japanese government officially acknowledged that Unit 731 had existed. Although the acknowledgement was not accompanied by a formal apology, it was the first time the state admitted that human experiments had been carried out under military orders. Since then, teachers, writers, and survivors have worked to ensure the topic is taught in schools and preserved in museums. Today, the former site of the unit in Harbin, northeastern China, houses the Unit 731 Memorial Museum. On display are remnants of medical instruments, original documents, prisoner letters, and photographs recovered from Soviet archives. The museum is not a space of accusation. It is a space of memory. The visit is quiet and uncomfortable. The corridors highlight the contrast between the scientific precision of the reports and the brutality of the methods that produced them. Despite all the documentation gathered, many records remain inaccessible. Some are still classified in Japan, others disappeared during the destruction of the base. And there are researchers who believe part of the experiments continued under different names in secret laboratories after the war, a hypothesis never confirmed. The legacy of Unit 731 goes beyond horror. It serves as a permanent reminder of how the line between scientific progress and human abuse can vanish when military power and research unite without moral limits. It is a story about what humanity is capable of when it believes the ends justify any means. Between 1936 and 1945, Unit 731 conducted experiments on thousands of people, prisoners of war, civilians, and even children. There is no exact number of victims, but the most accepted estimates suggest that between 10,000 and 12,000 people died inside the Harbin facilities. When the biological attacks conducted outside the base are included, the total number of deaths attributed to the Japanese program surpasses 400,000. Most of those involved never faced trial. Shiro Ishii, the man who designed the project, lived freely until he died of cancer in 1959 at age 67. Other scientists returned to civilian life and, years later, were recognized for their medical contributions, with no mention of their wartime activities. Some of the data obtained from the experiments were incorporated into post-war scientific research, and part of this documentation remains classified in official archives. Today, Unit 731 is remembered not only as a war crime, but as a symbol of the danger of science without ethics. It is a story that exposes how knowledge can be used either to create or to destroy, depending on who controls it. For this reason, the episode is studied in universities around the world as a permanent warning. Scientific advancement without moral principles always comes with a cost. The survivors who were able to testify left accounts marked by one common message: forgetting would allow everything to happen again. That is why telling this story is not a matter of guilt, but of responsibility. This video does not seek to judge countries, armies, or ideologies. The goal here is to preserve historical truth to recognize that in times of war, all sides made difficult and often flawed decisions. Understanding the past is not condemning nations. It is understanding what human beings are capable of when ethics become secondary. The history of Unit 731 belongs to all of humanity, and remembering it is the first step toward ensuring that nothing similar ever happens again.